Alexandra Rodriguez, and this is a little bit about my history as a social studies learner. So from the beginning of school, I remember being in elementary school and always being really excited to learn about social studies. When it was social studies time, I remember really enjoying looking through the textbook and reading and looking at the pictures and looking at the maps and finding the bolded words in the paragraph that you could look up on the back of the book. And I just remember reading all these really cool and interesting stories and realizing that they actually happened, which is another reason why history is so appealing to me, that they're actually real people and real events, and that these stories are true. Because I do enjoy reading, so I thought it was really interesting that all of the stuff that I would study in school and social studies actually happened. I had my best teacher that I've ever had my 9th grade year, and his name was Mr. Hutnick, and he taught me world cultures. He was so enthusiastic and just made learning about all these different types of people and cultures and civilizations really interesting to me. And he also was a veteran in the military. He was able to give us a perspective not only just as a teacher but as a soldier as well. So I remember learning about Vietnam and just him being able to tell us firsthand how it was and what he experienced. And that was really powerful. He was very passionate about just everything that he taught, and you could tell by how he gauged his lessons, how he was able to present different information to us. He brought in pictures, he brought in materials, just all different types of things that really interacted our class, which I really appreciated. You could tell that he really cared about what he was teaching. I also had another phenomenal teacher in my senior year of high school who actually was the reason why I was considering being a history major entering college. I didn't end up doing that, obviously, but his name was Mr. Capero, and he taught me AP Government. And I thought that was really interesting, that how the United States government worked and all the components that it entailed. I also enjoyed that class because he took us to Philadelphia, and we were able to visit the Constitution Center and saw the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall, and be able to connect those events that we studied about in class to an actual place was also really awesome to me, and I remember really enjoying doing that. A little bit of personal connections about what shaped me as a history and social studies learner was the fact that my grandparents raised my brother and I, and they were born in 1938, so with that being said, they've experienced everything from 1938 on, which is a lot of things. So I remember being in high school and learning about a certain topic, and then being able to come home and being like, Grandma, Grandpa, so tell me about this and tell me about that, and they were able to just give me a first-hand story, a little anecdote about what they experienced or what they remember about that event. And I remember that really being interesting and connecting the belief and the evidence that history does affect people. It's not just stories in a book, it's actually real. I remember my grandma telling me after I came home learning about President Kennedy's assassination, where she tells me how she remembers watching it on TV and how the panic that everyone was feeling, and she was with her friends when they saw it on TV. And I just remember that story sticking with me. I'm like, wow, I can't imagine seeing our president being assassinated live on television, and I just remember my grandparents lived through that. I also think it's pretty interesting, my grandma and grandpa's opinions about certain things in relation to what you'll read about or someone else's perspective. They'll tell me something, for example, I'm really love music, and I just remember talking to my grandmother about Woodstock and just that time period, and she has very strong beliefs on that. So I think that's interesting, just how my family was able to connect history, since there was such an age gap and they have lived through a lot. So that really shaped me as a learner. Also, my grandparents took my brother and I every spring break to a different place. So I've been to Gettysburg, I've been to Savannah, Georgia, I've been to Williamsburg, I've been to Fort McHenry, I've been to North Carolina. My grandpa was really into historical events, especially ones that were affected by war or had to do with the military because he was a drill sergeant in the United States Army. So I remember him taking me to Gettysburg, and we had the cassette tapes in our minivan that would document each place we went, and I remember going there and hearing about the Battle of Gettysburg and the Civil War and just how that was a real thing. And I just remember I think I was about 7 years old, and just realizing that our country was torn apart just because of people's beliefs on a topic, one of the main topics, such as slavery, which shaped the Civil War. And I just remember that being really powerful, and my grandpa just reading to us about it when we got back to the hotel at the end, and just stuff like that really shaped me as a learner, just actually being able to hands-on experience something that I read in a textbook or that I heard a story about. My family lives right outside of New Jersey, so I can say that another personal connection that shaped me was September 11th. I remember being in 3rd grade and that happening, and my grandpa actually worked on Wall Street at this time, and him not being able to come home. I remember schools being closed. I remember my cousins having to walk over the Brooklyn Bridge because they shut down the islands of Manhattan and no one could leave. I just remember how scared I was, and how, I guess you consider that my Pearl Harbor moment. Just, I'll never forget seeing that on TV. And I remember my grandparents taking me a few weeks after to Ground Zero and just seeing just nothing where once these two huge buildings once stood. I remember seeing them when I would go into the city with my family, and we just weren't there, and just looking at the skyline on the way out of the city and just seeing that huge hole, which was really shocking to me. I never pictured New York without them, and just the fact how it just hit home. I had neighbors who were passed away in the World Trade Center attack. I had friends whose parents passed away. My town was a huge commuter town into New York City, so a lot of people were affected by it, and I'll never forget that. But that also being said, my grandparents were able to keep us updated on a lot of current events because of the fact that there was a lot of, after the Trade Center went down, my uncle was deployed to Afghanistan, then went to Iraq, then Afghanistan again. I come from a big military family, so we really stayed updated on all the events that happened since 3rd grade. And I just remember my grandpa coming home every night at 5 o'clock with Daily News or New York Times and being like, here, we're going to read this after dinner. And I remember just sitting down, just looking through the newspaper every night with them, just staying updated about just different topics, which I think is also really important, to stay updated about current events. And that also fueled my interest in just what was happening around the world, not just in the United States of America. I just remember my grandparents always having subscriptions to National Geographic and Time Magazine and Life Magazine, and just always encouraging me to read about not just my culture or my little bubble that was New Jersey, but that there was a huge world out there and there was a lot to experience. So they were really inspiring to me to do well in school and to look into different types of topics to read about. And I remember when I was in 4th grade, my family took me to Puerto Rico, which is where my grandparents are originally from, and just being able to experience a completely different culture than what I was used to was amazing. I fell in love with everything that we did over there, the food, the music, the weather. I remember being in Old San Juan and just seeing the different street vendors and all the different types of people. It really just opened my eyes to how big the world was, and that was a part of me, my background. So ever since then, I've been really interested in different types of cultures. I remember my grandma taking me to the Statue of Liberty and then to Ellis Island and reading the stories of all the immigrants and just hearing about how people could travel across the sea and just be denied from entering, or having to wait, or being separated from their families. And just pretty much a lot of my historical background was just about me reading it and then my grandparents taking me and being able to actually see what I read about or experience firsthand what I was studying in school, which I will forever be thankful for them, because a lot of the things that I learned I remember because of that. I've never really had a bad experience with learning history. I mean, I just remember being not interested in some topics as much as others, but I always was interested to read about it. I remember watching Schindler's List for the first time, and that literally, like, being one of the most powerful films I've ever seen. And that got me into watching a lot of historical films as well, such as Gangs of New York, directed by Martin Scorsese, which was an awesome film, which was really neat because I've been to New York City so many times, and actual seeing the background behind what established what it is today was pretty interesting as well. I enjoy pop culture in that sense that you can relate it to historical events. My aunts and uncles had a really big influence on my upbringing as well. They introduced me to a bunch of music. I remember being really interested in the 60s and 70s and the music that came around then because of the lyrics and the meaning behind a lot of it and the power that music had at that time. And ever since then, I've been really interested in all different types of music, and I would consider myself a music junkie in that sense. I remember my aunt telling me about the events that led up to Woodstock and the events that preceded it, and just the huge movement of people who finally spoke out against the United States government, how they didn't support the war in Vietnam, and just how if you believe in something you could stand up for it. I truly enjoy learning about all aspects of history. I recently found out that I am part Cherokee on my father's side of my family, so that was pretty interesting, and I've always been interested in Native American culture, so learning that I have a part Cherokee in me was pretty cool, and I've always looked into that since then. I think it's really important for teachers to make history interesting, and in the sense that how my grandma and grandpa helped me learn, to take their students there, to show them this, or give personal experiences and stories about it. Also, I believe it's important as an educator to teach diversity, because in doing so you can tell and teach students that not everyone thinks, looks, and acts like you, which I think is really important. I just remember being able to travel to different states and being able to go to Puerto Rico, and just looking and learning and being around different people really shaped who I am as a person, and I think that's how you as a person grow as well. I also think that teaching American history and learning about American history is probably one of my favorite things, because you can actually go to those places and like see those things and firsthand experience it, which also brings back to what I've been saying throughout, that these stories are actually real and like actually happened. They're not just people and words in a textbook, they're actually real events. And so I think history's always been, if not my favorite subject, one of my favorite subjects. And I look forward to, as a teacher, integrating real life stories and just making it enjoyable and fun for my students, just like how my teachers did. And I feel like with history, you have a lot of options and opportunities to make learning fun for your students. So that's just a little bit about my history as a social studies learner. So thank you.